This is John from the University Skills Academy. Today we are going to look at active reading and test prediction.
So today we're going to talk about test preparation. And there's really 5 things about this class. Firstly, we need to stimulate your childlike curiosity. If you've ever had anything to do with a 2 to 4 year old child, they're always asking questions, even if there's no sense behind the questions. They're like human sponges. Anyhow, we'll reactivate that in you. The other thing is to show you how to read actively, and we'll be asking questions of chapter headings in your texts. We'll be creating your own study tests. Lastly, we'll look at how to get a hold of some actual past papers. Today we're going to be using the download, which is pages 682 and 683 from the Cisco Networking Academy program, Companion 1 and 2. You should be able to download this from the site, and it doesn't matter if you're a medical student or an engineer, the exercise is the same. What we need to do is to ask questions from our chapter headings. Now, but before we get to that point, in asking these questions of our chapter headings, this is where our childlike curiosity needs to be stimulated. If you've had anything to do with a child that's 2 to 4 years of age, they go through this stage of every answer you provide or everything they observe, they ask a question, and quite typically it will end in the question, why? Why? You give them a closed circuit answer and they come back with a why, and it can be trying at times. Anyhow, they're human sponges and they're taking in the whole world. So we want to get back to that, and we do this through active reading. We want you to be waking up in the morning thinking, what's the next chapter going to reveal in my textbook? To do this, we have 2 little exercises. One is called active reading, and the components of active reading involves, or what it is that we need to ask. And this will lead into exam prep, believe it or not. When you read, lazy readers or inactive readers, passive, yes, lazy readers, the goal is just to read the chapter and get it out of, have done with it. Well, in active reading, the goal is not just to finish, but it's to help you make a learning resource, and we do this by creating a list of questions from that reading. It might feel, or it might actually take a little longer to start with, but as you practice it, you'll actually get fairly prompt at it, and it won't take that much longer. And if you think about the alternative, if you don't read actively and you need to absorb what's actually in the books, you might end up having to read the same material 3 and 4 and 5 times before it sticks. But this way you can read it once, and the outcome of reading it this way is that you then have a separate learning resource. Let's see what this goes to. Active reading, the opposite of active is passive. When I say passive, read lazy. And the questions we need to ask are who, what, why, where, when, how. Now, not all of these questions will necessarily be answered in the chapter heading that you are working at. They may be, for the content, be a silly question, or they may actually be answered further along in the chapter, but they're the ones to ask. And how we go about it is we get a piece of paper and we split it in half, and then the top half of the page, the first couple of lines, we put in a reference. So the book, the chapter, the heading, the page numbers, this sort of thing. And then after that we put who, what, why, when, how, with enough space in between to put in a couple of questions. This diagram here is meant to represent an A4 piece of paper, or whatever size paper you typically use if it's legal in the other format. Okay, so that's what it should look like, and I've typed that up. I wouldn't necessarily type that up. If I was you, I'd do it by hand. All we have to do is to answer these questions. Once we've read the little chapter heading and the section thereafter, we need to write down the questions as quickly as we can. We need to do a brainstorm, and I don't mean 1 or 2, maybe 8 to 12 or 15, as many as you can get out. And then what this does is, because once you get into the habit of this, you start questioning, you start raising these questions while you're reading, and you're seeing the answers simultaneously. So it stimulates your permanent curiosity switch. So the next thing we need to do is to not just finish, but we want to learn, understand, and start to memorize. Then when we get to the end of the chapter heading, we don't fly on to the next part. We take these 2 to 3 minutes to write out these questions. Then, on the back side of that paper from the questions, you write in the answers. Once you've written in the answers, you go back and you cross out any unanswered questions. And hey presto, you've got a flashcard. You've got questions on one side, answers on the back, and you can start doing short-term memory work. And if you do that 2 or 3 times, for this particular chapter heading, terrific. We've now got a learning resource for that section of the book. It may be a little bit slower to start with, but or once you get into the habit of this, it will pay dividends in spades. And of course, you've now got the learning resource. Here's what the download or the content of the download should look like. Having set up our flashcards, we now want to write an exam paper. I hear, what? Yes, imagine that you are the teacher, and so you're a graduate now, and you're now teaching this content. What teachers do all the time is they start knocking out tests. So as you're reading this paper, you need to be looking at it as though it is a test paper. So get the attachment out and have a look at this. Now, the easiest sorts of questions to create when you start this are the fill in the blank type questions or a true-false question. Now, a true question is how easy to write. You just write a state that is correct in the book and you put the true-false at the end, and of course it's true. But with your fill in the gaps, the opposite is of course true. You add the word not, or you change a key word in the sentence, and is this correct, is this not correct? Well, no, actually it's not, but you've got to know. The other side, when you're putting in fill in the gaps, pick out your key words in the statements and then fill in the gaps. Let's have a look at what we have here. From this page, I would be doing something like systems that share a common routing strategy are considered something, or from exactly the same statements, autonomous systems share a common what strategy, or autonomous systems share a what routing strategy, or systems share a common routing strategy. One sentence, 3 questions. 6 questions from one sentence. An autonomous system is a collection of works under common administration that share a common routing strategy. True or false? Well, in this case it's true, and I've changed common for unique. I've changed common for unique. Of course, that is a false statement. So these are the sorts of things that you can start to do, and guess what? If you do this often enough, when you hit the exam, you've got a fairly good chance that you might start recognizing some of your own questions in the accessible part of the test. Could be interesting.
This has been John Knight from the University Skills Academy. Thank you for your time and your trouble. You will see me in the next session.